When we think about pain, most of us want to run away from it. We want to deny it, bury it, cover it up with achievements, with distractions, with the kind of noise that keeps us from hearing what hurts. But what Carl Jung discovered, and what I have seen again and again in people's lives, including my own, is that pain, when we dare to face it, can become one of the greatest teachers we'll ever have. It is in the wound that the seeds of wisdom are planted. And the moment we stop resisting, the moment we decide to turn toward the wound instead of away from it, something extraordinary begins to happen. We start to realize that what once felt like a breaking point can become a turning point. I want to invite you into this idea slowly, because it's not easy. Nobody likes pain. Nobody asks for heartbreak, betrayal, failure, illness, or loss. But the truth is, these things come to every one of us. They don't discriminate. And if we look around, we'll see that the people who are most deeply alive, the people whose presence carries weight, who shine with authenticity, who seem to have touched something greater than themselves, those are often the very people who have endured suffering and come through it changed. Jung said it very directly, there is no coming to consciousness without pain. In other words, you cannot wake up to the truth of who you are without going through the valley of suffering. It is a threshold, a rite of passage into a deeper kind of life. Let me share a story to bring this alive. I once interviewed a woman who had survived tremendous loss. She had lost her child, something almost unimaginable for any parent. For years she lived inside her grief, angry at God, angry at the world, angry even at herself. But over time, she found a way not only to live, but to create a foundation in her child's name, helping other families going through similar tragedies. She told me, my greatest wound became my greatest mission. That's what I mean by wound to wisdom. The very thing that once almost destroyed her became the source of her deepest purpose. It didn't erase the pain. It didn't make the loss any less real. But it transformed the meaning of that pain into something larger, something life-giving. Now, Jung would say that this is not a coincidence. He believed that the psyche has a kind of built-in drive toward wholeness. Every trauma, every shadow, every piece of suffering we carry, it isn't meaningless. It's the psyche's way of pushing us to confront what we don't want to face, to integrate what we've split off, to expand beyond the smaller version of ourselves. You see, the wound points us to the places where growth is most necessary. The very thing we want to avoid is the doorway into transformation. If we try to cover it up, numb it, deny it, that pain will keep resurfacing in different forms, addictions, anxieties, self-sabotage, cycles of broken relationships. But if we face it directly, if we listen to what it's trying to teach us, it becomes a path into our power. Think of it like this. The crack in the vessel is not the end of the vessel. It is the place where the light can enter. Many of you have heard that phrase before, but it's not just poetry. It's psychology. When you've been broken open by pain, the ego, the little shell you built around yourself to stay safe, can no longer hold. And that is terrifying. But it's also liberating. Because in that moment, you are no longer confined to the false image you carried of yourself. You are forced to go deeper, to find strength you didn't know you had, to discover capacities of compassion and resilience that were dormant within you. That's what wisdom looks like, not a head full of knowledge, but a heart that has been stretched wide by suffering and still chooses to love. Let me ask you something. Think back to the hardest moment of your life. Maybe it was an illness. Maybe a divorce. Maybe being abandoned, betrayed, or overlooked. Whatever it was, ask yourself honestly, did it not, in some way, teach you something about who you are? Did it not carve out a deeper sense of empathy, humility, or courage? I'm not saying it was good. Pain is never good. I would never romanticize trauma. But what I am saying is that if you are willing to stand in the fire of that experience, not escape it, not numb it, but really face it, then the fire doesn't only burn you. It refines you. It burns away illusions, false securities, everything that isn't real. And what emerges is a truer self, a wiser self. That is the alchemy of the human spirit, pain into power, wound into wisdom. Jung also gave us a very powerful image, the archetype of the wounded healer. He believed that those who have been wounded and have done the work of healing themselves are uniquely equipped to heal others. Think about that. The very scar that you want to hide, the part of your story you may feel ashamed of, is the part that makes you trustworthy. People can feel when you've lived through something real. They can sense it in your presence. Your scar becomes your credential, your testimony that you have gone into the depths and returned. That's why some of the most compassionate doctors are those who were once patients. Some of the most gifted counselors are those who have sat in despair. Some of the greatest leaders are those who have known failure, humiliation, or betrayal. Your wound is not just personal. It's the place where your humanity connects with the humanity of others. And yet, let's be honest, we live in a culture that tells us to hide our wounds. To stay polished. To keep smiling. To keep moving as if nothing happened. But when we do that, we rob ourselves of the very thing that could liberate us. Jung often warned that whatever remains unconscious will direct our lives, and we will call it fate. In other words, if you don't face your wound, it will run you. It will show up in your relationships, in your work, in your self-worth. But if you face it consciously, if you bring it into the light, then it becomes a source of wisdom instead of a hidden chain. This is why I say to you today, do not despise your wound. Do not think it makes you weak. It is a passageway. It is an initiation into the deeper life. And when you move through it with courage, you not only free yourself, you become a beacon for others. Your survival becomes someone else's inspiration. Your honesty becomes someone else's permission. Your healing becomes someone else's hope. So here is what I want you to take with you: the wound is not the end of the story. It is the beginning of a new chapter. It is the place where you learn what strength really means, where compassion takes root, where authenticity is born. Jung showed us that without this confrontation, we remain asleep. But with it, we awaken to the fullness of who we are. And once you've tasted that wisdom, once you've felt your life expand because of it, you will never again see pain in the same way. You will know that even in the darkest moment, there is the possibility of light. Even in the wound, there is the seed of power. And so I leave you with this: the wound is not where you were broken. It is where you are being remade. Carry that truth with you, and let it remind you that your story, every part of it, is not a burden, but a gift. And if you are brave enough to live it fully, your wound will not be your weakness. It will be your wisdom. When we speak about suffering, most of us think first of endurance. We think of how long we can carry it, how much we can bear, how to survive until the pain subsides. But Carl Jung showed us something deeper: suffering is not only about endurance. It is about meaning. Because the difference between a suffering that destroys and a suffering that transforms lies in whether or not we can discover meaning within it. Pain without meaning is despair. Pain with meaning becomes power. Jung once observed that man is not destroyed by suffering, he is destroyed by suffering without meaning. What he was pointing to is a truth many of us instinctively know, but struggle to live. The human spirit can endure extraordinary hardship when it can see purpose in that hardship. If you think of the people throughout history who endured oppression, exile, imprisonment, even persecution, you will find one thing in common: those who survived with their humanity intact were those who could place their suffering inside a larger story. They didn't necessarily escape the pain. They didn't always win in worldly terms. But they found a way to say, this suffering is not meaningless. It is calling me towards something larger than myself. And that conviction gave them strength beyond measure. Now let me pause here, because I know how radical this can sound. When we are in the midst of suffering, when we lose someone we love, when illness strikes, when betrayal cuts deep, when life turns upside down, the last thing we want to hear is, "This has meaning." In those moments, everything feels meaningless. And Jung never denied that. He understood suffering as chaos, as rupture, as the shattering of the world we thought we knew. But what he also taught is that within that chaos lies a hidden invitation, the chance to create meaning where there was none, to build a bridge between the devastation and a deeper sense of purpose. Meaning is not something given from the outside. It is something we discover, or more truthfully, something we create, through the way we respond. Think about fire. Fire can destroy, but it can also refine. The difference is how we engage with it. In the same way, suffering can reduce us to ashes, or it can refine us into gold. The fire is the same, but the meaning we assign to it makes the difference between being consumed and being transformed. That is why meaning is not a luxury. It is the very thing that allows us to survive suffering without losing ourselves. Jung's psychology offers us a lens to see this clearly. He spoke often of individuation, the process of becoming whole, of integrating all the parts of ourselves, both conscious and unconscious. And he knew that suffering plays a central role in this process. Why? Because suffering exposes the cracks in the stories we've been living. It dismantles the false images we've built of ourselves. It forces us to confront aspects of life and of ourselves that we would rather avoid. In other words, suffering tears away the mask, and that tearing hurts. But if we give it meaning, that tearing becomes the very process by which we are made more whole. The wound, in this sense, becomes the doorway into authenticity. Now, what does it actually mean to find meaning in suffering? It does not mean justifying the suffering. It does not mean pretending it is good, or pretending it was sent by some external force to teach us a lesson. No. Meaning in suffering is not about denying the pain. It is about refusing to let the pain be the final word. It is about interpreting the suffering as part of a larger movement toward growth, insight, compassion, or transformation. It is a choice to say, this suffering will not end me. It will shape me. One of Jung's great insights was that the psyche itself seeks meaning. We are meaning-making beings. When something tragic happens, we cannot rest until we have found some way of integrating it into a story that makes sense. Otherwise, it haunts us as chaos. We replay it in our dreams, we relive it in our relationships, we carry it unconsciously as trauma. But once we discover meaning, even if that meaning is simply, through this suffering I discovered a strength I never knew I had, the chaos begins to settle into order. The wound begins to integrate into the larger pattern of our life. I want you to think of your life as a great tapestry. From up close, all we see are the tangled threads, the knots, the frayed edges. It can look messy and senseless. But if you step back, if you widen the frame, you begin to see how every thread contributes to the larger picture. Suffering, when we are in it, feels like nothing but tangled thread. But meaning allows us to step back and glimpse the larger design. It doesn't erase the pain, but it places it inside a story where it can contribute to something beautiful, something whole. This is why so many spiritual traditions speak of surrendering to something greater. Jung, though a scientist of the psyche, understood this as well. He believed that the self, the true center of our being, holds a wisdom that transcends the ego. When suffering strikes, the ego cries out, "Why me? This shouldn't be happening." But the deeper self whispers, "There is something here for you to learn, something essential for your growth." Meaning arises when we listen to that deeper voice. Now, I want to be clear. Meaning does not cancel grief. It does not take away the tears. It does not make betrayal less painful, or death less final. What meaning does is give us the courage to walk through the valley of shadows without collapsing into despair. It gives us a compass when everything else has been stripped away. And sometimes that compass is very simple. Sometimes the meaning is nothing more than, if I can survive this, I can help someone else survive too. That alone is enough to keep the human spirit alive. Jung said that neurosis, the suffering of the modern soul, often arises from a lack of meaning. When we feel our lives are meaningless, even small pains become unbearable. But when we feel our lives are anchored in purpose, even great pain becomes endurable. This is why people can survive incredible hardships, even thrive after them, when they are able to say, "This suffering is not wasted. It belongs to the story of who I am becoming." Meaning is what turns trauma into testimony, struggle into strength, loss into legacy. I want you to imagine for a moment that every pain you have carried is like a stone. Some of you are walking around with pockets full of stones, weighed down, weary. Meaning is what turns those stones into an altar. Instead of stumbling under their weight, you begin to arrange them into something sacred. The stones are still heavy, but now they are part of something beautiful, something that tells a story. That is the power of meaning. And so the challenge for each of us is not to escape suffering, because that is impossible. The challenge is to discover the meaning that will allow us to carry it with dignity and transform it into power. That meaning may come slowly. It may take years. But once it comes, it will change everything. You will realize that the suffering did not crush you, it carved you into a vessel strong enough to hold more life, more compassion, more truth than you ever thought possible. So when you find yourself in the middle of pain, do not only ask, "How do I make this stop?" Ask also, "What does this mean for me? What can this teach me? How might this pain be shaping me into someone who can live more fully, love more deeply, give more generously?" Because when you ask those questions, you are already beginning the work of transformation. Meaning is what makes the unbearable bearable. Meaning is what takes the chaos and turns it into order. Meaning is what allows you to look back, years later, and say, "That was the hardest time of my life, but it was also the time that made me who I am today." So let me leave you with this: suffering will come, as surely as night follows day. But suffering without meaning is despair. Suffering with meaning is power. If you can find, or create, meaning in your pain, then no suffering can destroy you. Because meaning is the bridge between pain and purpose, between loss and growth, between what breaks you and what remakes you. And that bridge is always there, waiting for you to step onto it. The closing truth is simple: pain becomes bearable when it belongs to a story larger than itself.